My straight lab partner locked the stacks, said he needed hands-on research. Imagine walking into a university chemistry lab on the first day of your advanced organic synthesis class, not expecting anything beyond the usual mix of complicated formulas and tedious lab reports. That's exactly where I found myself last semester at Westfield University, a prestigious school known for its cutting-edge research facilities and competitive science programs. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the familiar smell of chemicals lingered in the air, and students shuffled around nervously, trying to find their assigned lab stations. I'm Alex Chun, by the way, a junior majoring in biochemistry with dreams of medical school and a tendency to lose myself in research rather than dealing with my personal life. I'd always been the type to prioritize academics over relationships, partly because I was passionate about science, but also because navigating the dating scene as a gay man in a predominantly straight field sometimes felt like an additional experiment I wasn't equipped to handle. When Professor Harrington announced we'd be working in pairs for the semester-long research project worth half our grade, I felt the usual dread of partner assignments. Would I get stuck with someone who wouldn't pull their weight? Or worse, someone uncomfortable with my sexuality once they inevitably found out? The professor read through the pairings, and I heard my name followed by James Sullivan. I glanced around the room, wondering which face belonged to my new lab partner. That's when he approached me, tall, with tousled brown hair and the kind of confident smile that suggested he'd never worried about fitting in a day in his life. "Hey, I'm James," he said, extending his hand. "Looks like we'll be spending a lot of time together this semester." His handshake was firm, his eyes were a startling shade of blue, and I immediately noticed the slight dimple in his left cheek when he smiled. He wore a Westfield Athletics hoodie that hinted at the muscular frame underneath, clearly a jock, and almost certainly straight. Great, I thought, just my luck to be paired with someone who probably had more interest in protein shakes than protein synthesis. Let me explain why this pairing mattered so much beyond the obvious academic implications. In chemistry, the right partnership can elevate both people's work, creating a synergy that leads to breakthrough discoveries. The wrong partnership can lead to failed experiments, missed deadlines, and a semester of awkward interactions. This project wasn't just about getting a good grade. It was about producing original research that could potentially be published, something that would look impressive on medical school applications. So when Professor Harrington explained that we'd be investigating novel applications of green chemistry in pharmaceutical development, I knew this partnership would define much of my junior year experience. The project itself was fascinating. We were tasked with developing environmentally friendly synthesis methods for common pharmaceutical compounds, reducing toxic waste, and making drug production more sustainable. It was cutting-edge work that required creativity, precision, and countless hours in the lab. As Professor Harrington outlined the parameters, I stole glances at James, trying to gauge his reaction. To my surprise, he was taking detailed notes, his expression focused and engaged. Maybe I had judged him too quickly. Our first few lab sessions together were characterized by an awkward dance of politeness and professional distance. I kept conversations strictly about chemical reactions and experimental protocols, while James seemed to operate on autopilot, following instructions competently but without much enthusiasm. We were efficient but disconnected, like two elements that hadn't yet found their catalytic reaction. That changed during our third week when a minor lab accident, James accidentally knocking over a beaker of harmless saline solution, broke the tension. "Well, there goes my shot at a Nobel Prize," he joked, quickly grabbing paper towels to clean up the spill. I couldn't help but laugh, and something in the atmosphere between us shifted. "You know," he said as we continued our experiment, "I was worried you thought I was some dumb jock who got lucky in organic chemistry. I'm actually really into this stuff." He explained that he was on the swimming team, but was majoring in chemistry with hopes of going into pharmaceutical research. Swimming pays the bills, or rather, the scholarship does, but this, he gestured around the lab, this is what I really care about. That conversation marked a turning point in our dynamic. We discovered shared interests beyond chemistry, a love for obscure sci-fi shows, a weakness for late-night diner food, and a mutual admiration for our intimidating biochemistry professor, who everyone else seemed to fear. Our lab sessions grew longer as we lost track of time, discussing experimental variables and then drifting into personal stories. I learned that James came from a small town in the Midwest, had 3 younger sisters who he adored, and had been swimming competitively since he was 8 years old. I found myself sharing more than I usually would with classmates. My parents' expectations, my passion for medical research, and even my frustrations with dating in college. I was careful, though, not to explicitly mention my sexuality. Not because I was ashamed, but because I'd learned from experience that revealing that part of myself sometimes changed dynamics in unpredictable ways. James never talked about dating either, though he occasionally mentioned going to parties with teammates or studying with friends from his dorm. I assumed he had a girlfriend or at least was interested in women, given the way female classmates seemed to find excuses to talk to him during lab cleanup times. About a month into our partnership, our project hit a significant roadblock. Our initial synthesis approach wasn't yielding the results we'd hoped for, and we were falling behind other teams. After a particularly frustrating lab session where nothing seemed to go right, James suggested we needed a new strategy. "We need more time and fewer distractions," he said, packing up his notebook. "Have you ever been to the chemistry library in the old science building? The one with those stacks of journals that go back to the 1800s? I had to admit I hadn't explored that resource. Most students did their research online now, accessing journals through the university's digital subscriptions. It's amazing," James continued, his eyes lighting up with enthusiasm. "There are papers there that haven't been digitized, experimental methods that people have forgotten about. Plus, it's quiet. Nobody goes there anymore except the really serious researchers." The next day, James led me to the old science building, a Gothic structure that stood in contrast to the modern glass and steel of the new research facilities. The chemistry library was on the 3rd floor, a cavernous room with high ceilings, tall windows that let in dusty beams of sunlight, and row upon row of metal shelving filled with bound journals and reference books. The air smelled of old paper and wood polish. A single librarian sat at a desk near the entrance, looking surprised to see students. "This is perfect," James whispered as he led me deeper into the stacks. "Look at all these resources nobody's using." He pulled out a bound volume of the Journal of Organic Chemistry from 1973. Some of the best methodology papers were published decades ago, and people just don't look at them anymore. His enthusiasm was contagious, and I found myself getting excited about the possibility of finding some forgotten technique that could help our project. We spent hours that first day, pulling journals from shelves, spreading them across a large wooden table in a secluded corner of the library. As the afternoon wore on, the already quiet library became even more silent. At some point, I realized we hadn't seen the librarian or any other students for hours. When I mentioned this to James, a mischievous smile spread across his face. "Want to know a secret?" he asked, leaning closer. "The library officially closes at 6, but the librarian never checks the stacks before locking up. If you're quiet and stay back here, you can work as long as you want. The doors lock automatically when you leave, so you can get out anytime, but nobody can come in after hours." He must have seen the concern on my face because he quickly added, "It's not breaking rules exactly. We're just extending the research hours. I've done it a few times for other projects." I hesitated, weighing the propriety of essentially hiding in the library after hours against the allure of uninterrupted research time. "Think about it," James continued. "No distractions, no other students hogging equipment or making noise, just us and all these resources. We could make real progress on our project." There was something in the way he said "just us" that made my heart beat a little faster, though I tried to ignore it. "So you're suggesting we lock the stacks?" I asked, using what I assumed was some kind of student slang for staying after hours. James laughed. "I've never heard it called that before, but yeah, exactly. We lock the stacks and do some serious hands-on research." He wiggled his eyebrows in an exaggerated way that made me laugh despite my reservations. "Come on, Alex. Live a little. For science." And that's how it started, our after-hours research sessions in the chemistry library. The first night, I was nervous, constantly looking over my shoulder and jumping at every creak of the old building. James found my anxiety amusing, but was surprisingly reassuring. "Relax," he said. "The worst that could happen is a security guard asks us to leave, and we just explain we're working on an important project. They're usually cool about it." As it turned out, no one ever discovered our secret study sessions. We fell into a routine, meeting at the library in the late afternoon, working through dinner, James always brought snacks to share, and sometimes staying until midnight or later, lost in our research. It was during these long evenings that our conversations began to deepen. Away from the bustle of the main campus, in the quiet intimacy of the abandoned library, we talked about things that mattered, our hopes for the future, our fears, our families. I learned that despite James's confident exterior, he worried about disappointing his parents, who had sacrificed a lot to support his swimming and academics. He revealed that he sometimes felt caught between two worlds: the athletic community, where intellectual pursuits were often downplayed, and the academic world, where his athletic scholarship made some people assume he wasn't serious about science. I found myself sharing my own struggles, the pressure of being a first-generation college student, my complicated relationship with my traditional parents who still hoped I would meet the right girl despite my coming out in high school. When I mentioned this last part, I felt a moment of panic, realizing I had just casually come out to James. I watched his face carefully, bracing for the subtle shift in behavior I'd experienced so many times before, the slight increase in distance, the careful monitoring of words and actions. But James just nodded thoughtfully. "That must be tough," he said. "My sister went through something similar with our grandparents when she came out as bi. They came around eventually, but it took time." He paused, then added, "For what it's worth, I think your parents are lucky to have you as a son, regardless of who you end up dating." The simple acceptance in his response made something tight in my chest loosen. Our conversation moved on to other topics, but something had shifted between us. There was a new level of comfort, a sense that we could be fully ourselves with each other. And as our late-night research sessions continued, I found myself looking forward to them not just for the progress we were making on our project, but for the time spent with James. Our research was going well too. In those dusty old journals, we discovered a synthesis approach from the 1980s that had been largely forgotten, but offered a promising foundation for our green chemistry modifications. We began running experiments based on these findings, spending our regular lab hours implementing what we'd researched during our locked stacks sessions. Professor Harrington noticed our progress, commenting favorably on our methodology during a project check-in. "You two have developed quite an effective partnership," she remarked. "It's refreshing to see students so engaged with the historical literature in the field." James caught my eye and winked, our secret shared understanding making me smile despite myself. As the weeks passed, our project evolved, and so did my feelings for James. I tried to dismiss them as a natural response to spending so much time with someone attractive and engaging, but it was becoming harder to ignore the way my heart raced when he leaned close to show me something in a journal, or how I found myself thinking about him when we weren't together. I reminded myself repeatedly that he was almost certainly straight, that he was just being friendly, that misinterpreting our connection would not only be embarrassing, but could ruin our productive working relationship. Then came the night that changed everything. We were in our usual spot in the library, surrounded by open books and notebooks filled with chemical structures. It was nearly midnight, and we'd been working for hours on a particularly challenging aspect of our synthesis. James had been quieter than usual all evening, seemingly distracted. "I think we need a break," he finally said, pushing away from the table and stretching his arms above his head. His Westfield swimming t-shirt rode up slightly, revealing a glimpse of his toned stomach. I quickly looked away, focusing intently on my notes. "Let's go for a walk," he suggested. "Clear our heads." The library at night was a different place, shadowy and full of strange noises as the old building settled. We wandered through the stacks, our conversation drifting from our project to classes to plans for the upcoming break. As we turned down a particularly narrow aisle between tall shelves, James suddenly stopped walking. "Alex," he said, his voice serious in a way that made me nervous. "There's something I need to tell you." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I'd come to recognize as a sign he was nervous. "I haven't been completely honest with you." My mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. Was he dropping the class? Had he been faking his interest in our research? Was he uncomfortable with my sexuality after all? "The thing is," he continued, not quite meeting my eyes, "I didn't suggest coming to this library just because of the research resources." He took a deep breath. "I suggested it because I wanted to spend time with you. Alone." I stared at him, not fully comprehending what he was saying. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I've been attracted to you since the first day of class," he said, the words coming out in a rush. I've never felt this way about a guy before, and it's been confusing as hell, but I know it's real. And I hope, you might feel something too. I was speechless, convinced I had somehow misheard or misunderstood. James Sullivan, swimming team star, seemingly straight guy who could have dated anyone on campus, was saying he had feelings for me? I understand if you don't feel the same way, he continued, filling the silence my shock had created. And I completely respect that. We can just forget I said anything and keep working on our project. I just needed you to know. Finally finding my voice, I asked, but I always thought you were straight. James gave a small, self-deprecating laugh. Yeah, so did I. For a long time. I dated girls in high school and my freshman year here. But I've been questioning things for a while now. And then I met you. And he trailed off, shrugging helplessly. Let's just say you made some things clearer for me. Why didn't you say something sooner? I asked, still trying to process this revelation. I was scared, he admitted. Scared of what it meant about me. Scared you wouldn't feel the same way. Scared of messing up our partnership and the project. But mostly I was scared of not saying anything and always wondering what might have happened if I'd been braver. In that moment, standing between rows of forgotten chemical journals, with dust motes dancing in the dim emergency lighting, everything shifted. The weeks of growing friendship, the lingering glances I'd dismissed, the comfort we'd found in each other's company, it all realigned into a new understanding. I took a step toward him, closing the distance between us. I've been telling myself not to feel this way about you, I confessed, convincing myself it was one-sided and impossible. The hope that bloomed on his face was beautiful to witness. And now, he asked softly, now I'm thinking impossible might be overrated, I said, surprising myself with my boldness. What happened next was both completely unexpected and somehow inevitable, like a chemical reaction that in retrospect could only have proceeded in one direction, given the right conditions. James leaned forward, hesitantly at first, and then with growing confidence as I met him halfway. Our first kiss was tentative, a gentle exploration that quickly deepened into something more urgent. His hands found my waist, pulling me closer, while mine reached up to touch his face, the stubble on his jaw rough against my palms. When we finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, James rested his forehead against mine. I've been wanting to do that for weeks, he admitted with a small laugh. Chemistry has never been this exciting. I don't know, I teased, feeling lightheaded and bold. I've always found chemical reactions pretty thrilling. He laughed, the sound echoing slightly in the empty library. Nerd, he said affectionately, before kissing me again. That night marked the beginning of a transformation in our relationship, though we were both navigating unfamiliar territory. For me, it was the first time dating someone who was still coming to terms with his sexuality. For James, everything was new. The experience of being with another man, the questions about identity and labels, the considerations about who to tell and when. We agreed to take things slowly, focusing on our growing feelings for each other while maintaining our commitment to our research project. Our locked stack sessions took on a new dimension, still primarily focused on research, but now interspersed with conversations about our relationship and occasional breaks for more intimate moments between the shelves. There was something almost magical about those nights in the library, as if we existed in a world of our own making, separate from the pressures and expectations of campus life. During regular lab hours, we maintained a professional demeanor, though I occasionally caught James looking at me with a warmth that made it difficult to concentrate on titrations and spectral analyses. Our project continued to progress well, our personal connections seemingly enhancing our academic collaboration rather than distracting from it. About 3 weeks after our first kiss, we faced our first real challenge as a couple. The swimming team was hosting a major meet, and James wanted me to attend. It would mean a lot to have you there, he said during one of our library sessions. But I understand if it's too weird, since most of my teammates don't know about us. I could hear the uncertainty in his voice, the navigation of new territory. Do you want them to know? I asked carefully. About us. About you. James was quiet for a moment, considering. I'm not ashamed, he finally said. Of you, or of how I feel. But it's complicated. Some of these guys have been my friends for years. I share a locker room with them every day. I don't know how they'll react. You don't have to figure it all out at once, I assured him. Coming out is a process, not an event. And it's your process on your timeline. He looked at me with such gratitude that it made my heart ache. How did I get lucky enough to find someone so understanding? Well, I said lightly, you did lock us in a library together for weeks on end. Stockholm Syndrome might be a factor. That made him laugh, breaking the tension. So you'll come? Just as my lab partner for now. Of course, I agreed. I'll be there cheering for you, in a completely professional, academically appropriate way. The swim meet was crowded and noisy, the air humid and thick with the smell of chlorine. I found a seat in the bleachers, feeling slightly out of place among the enthusiastic fans and family members. When James emerged with his team, his tall figure easy to spot, I felt a surge of pride and affection. He scanned the crowd until he found me, his face lighting up with a smile that seemed to be just for me, even from a distance. Watching him compete was a revelation. The power and grace of his movements through the water, the focused intensity of his expression, so different from his relaxed demeanor in the lab. When he won his individual event, setting a new personal best time, I cheered as loudly as anyone. After the meet concluded, I waited near the exit of the natatorium, unsure of protocol. Would he want to acknowledge me in front of his teammates? Should I just text him congratulations and leave? My uncertainty was resolved when James emerged with a group of swimmers, his hair still damp from the shower. He spotted me and immediately broke away from his friends, heading in my direction. You came, he said, his smile wide and genuine. I said I would, I replied. You were amazing out there. Before I could say anything else, he surprised me by pulling me into a hug. It wasn't a romantic embrace. It could easily be interpreted as one friend congratulating another, but it was deliberately public, a statement of sorts. Thank you for being here, he said quietly, just for me to hear. It means more than you know. As he pulled back, I noticed some of his teammates watching us with curious expressions. James noticed too and made a decision that I could see play out across his face. Hey guys, he called to them. Come meet my lab partner, Alex. As they approached, he added, more quietly but still clearly, and the guy I've been seeing. The reactions varied, surprise from most, a knowing smile from one, and uncomfortable confusion from a couple. But no one said anything negative, at least not in that moment. One by one, they shook my hand, congratulated James on his race, and gradually drifted away to their own celebrations or commitments. That was brave, I said when we were relatively alone again. James shrugged, though I could see tension in his shoulders. It felt right. I'm tired of compartmentalizing my life. Swimmer James, chemistry nerd James, questioning his sexuality James. I want to just be me, with all parts connected. I squeezed his hand briefly. How do you feel? Terrified, he admitted with a shaky laugh. But good. Free. He looked at me with those intense blue eyes. Want to get dinner? There's a team celebration at Marino's, but I'd rather just be with you tonight. We ended up at a small Thai restaurant off campus, talking for hours about everything and nothing, his excitement about the race, our project's progress, a movie we both wanted to see. It felt normal and extraordinary at the same time, this simple act of having dinner together as more than lab partners. The following weeks brought new adjustments as our relationship became less of a secret. We still had our private research sessions in the locked stacks, but we also began spending time together in more public settings, studying in the campus coffee shop, having lunch between classes, attending a lecture series on emerging pharmaceutical technologies. James's process of coming out continued gradually, telling close friends, having sometimes difficult conversations with teammates, eventually calling his parents for a long, emotional discussion that left him drained but relieved. They were surprised, he told me afterward, but my mom said she just wants me to be happy. And my dad? He needs time, but he said he loves me no matter what. It's more than many people get. Our research project, meanwhile, was exceeding expectations. The synthesis method we developed was producing excellent results with significantly reduced environmental impact compared to traditional approaches. Professor Harrington was impressed enough to suggest we consider submitting our findings to an undergraduate research journal, an opportunity that could significantly boost both our academic careers. As the end of the semester approached, we found ourselves facing the culmination of our project, a formal presentation to the chemistry department faculty and students. We spent countless hours preparing, refining our data, creating slides, and practicing our delivery. The night before the presentation, We were in our usual spot in the chemistry library, surrounded by the familiar shelves that had witnessed the evolution of both our research and our relationship. "Do you realize," James said, looking around at the stacks, "that tomorrow will be our last official locked stack session? After the presentation, the project is over." I hadn't thought about it that way, and the realization brought an unexpected pang of nostalgia. "This place has been good to us," I said, running my hand along the spine of a journal that had provided a key breakthrough in our research, both scientifically and personally. James smiled, coming to stand beside me. "I have a confession to make," he said, his voice playful. "Remember when I first brought you here and said I knew about this place because I'd used it for previous research? Yeah, that wasn't entirely true," he admitted. "I did know about the library, but I'd never actually stayed after hours before. I made that up to sound cool and experienced." I stared at him in disbelief. "You mean that first night, when you were so confident about locking the stacks, you had never actually done it before?" He shook his head, looking sheepish. "Nope. I just really wanted an excuse to spend more time with you. And I'd heard rumors from older students that people sometimes stayed here after closing. I figured it would work out. What if we'd gotten caught? Or locked in for real?" I asked, torn between amusement and exasperation. "Worth the risk," he said simply, pulling me closer. "Definitely worth it." Our presentation the next day was a success. Standing side by side in front of the department, explaining our methodology and findings, I felt a sense of accomplishment that went beyond academics. We fielded questions confidently, our months of research and collaboration evident in how we complemented each other's responses. Professor Harrington's approving nods throughout confirmed what we already knew. We had created something valuable together. After the presentation, as we accepted congratulations from faculty and fellow students, James kept his hand at the small of my back, a subtle but clear statement about our relationship. Not everyone seemed comfortable with this development. I noticed a few raised eyebrows and whispered comments, but most people focused on our research, which was what really mattered in that setting. Later that evening, we celebrated with a small group of friends at a local restaurant, the relief of completing the project mixing with pride in what we'd accomplished. As the night wound down, James suggested we take a walk across campus. It was a clear, cool evening, the paths lit by old-fashioned lampposts, the buildings of Westfield University creating familiar silhouettes against the night sky. Our path naturally led us to the old science building, dark and quiet at this late hour. We stood looking up at it, both thinking of the hours we'd spent inside, the discoveries we'd made about chemistry and each other. "I was thinking," James said, breaking the comfortable silence, "about next semester. There's an advanced research course that pairs with the biomedical ethics seminar. Professor Harrington mentioned she'd be willing to supervise if we wanted to continue our work, maybe develop some applications for the synthesis method we created. Are you asking me to be your lab partner again?" I teased, though the idea of continuing our research together was genuinely appealing. "I'm asking for a lot more than that," he said seriously, turning to face me. "I'm asking if you want to keep building something together, in the lab and outside of it. Because these past few months have been the most challenging and rewarding of my life, and I don't want that to end just because this project is complete." The sincerity in his voice moved me deeply. "I think we've proven we make a good team," I said. "In chemistry and in other areas of research." "Hands-on research," he agreed with a grin, pulling me closer and kissing me under the stars, in front of the building where our story had really begun. As we walked back across campus, hand in hand, I reflected on the unexpected journey that had started with a simple lab assignment. We had begun as strangers with assumptions about each other, become partners in research, and discovered a connection neither of us had anticipated. There would be challenges ahead, more coming-out conversations for James, navigating a relationship while maintaining our academic focus, dealing with the occasional prejudice or misunderstanding from others. But we would face those challenges together, with the same curiosity, persistence, and willingness to explore the unknown that had characterized both our scientific work and our evolving relationship. Sometimes the most important discoveries happen when you're looking for something else entirely. In seeking answers about chemical reactions, we had stumbled upon something equally complex and far more personal: the chemistry between two people that transforms both in the process. And like any good scientists, We were eager to continue that exploration, to see where this particular reaction might lead. Total _char_count, 18,642.